The eviction notice trembled in Celestine's hands as she stared at the 30-day deadline. 3 months behind on rent, and Mrs. Patterson had finally run out of patience. The Portland Public Library's part-time salary barely covered groceries, let alone the cramped studio apartment she called home. She crumpled the paper and tossed it toward the overflowing trash can. It missed, joining the collection of unpaid bills scattered across her threadbare carpet. The phone rang, shrill and demanding. Celestine Ashford? Speaking. This is Harrison and Associates Legal Services. We represent the Voltaire Foundation. You've been selected to attend an exclusive charitable event at the Voltaire Estate in Martha's Vineyard. All expenses paid, plus a potential employment opportunity. Celestine's pulse quickened. She'd never heard of the Voltaire Foundation, but employment was employment. What kind of opportunity? Library sciences and archival work. Mr. Voltaire has an extensive private collection requiring professional organization. The position offers a starting salary of $80,000 annually. The number hit her like a physical blow. $80,000. More than she'd make in 3 years at her current job. There's a formal invitation being delivered to your address within the hour. The event is tomorrow evening. Transportation will be provided. The line went dead before she could ask questions. Celestine stared at her phone, wondering if desperation had finally driven her to hallucinations. Rich people didn't randomly offer librarians from Oregon jobs that paid real money. 43 minutes later, someone knocked on her door. A courier in an expensive suit handed her a cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. The paper felt thick and luxurious between her fingers, nothing like the cheap stationery she was used to handling. Inside, elegant script announced her invitation to an intimate gathering at the Voltaire Estate. A private jet would collect her from Portland International at 3 p.m. the following day. Formal attire required. Celestine owned exactly one dress suitable for anything beyond grocery shopping. A simple black number she'd bought for her high school graduation 6 years ago. It would have to do. She spent the evening researching Darius Voltaire online. The search results painted a picture of ruthless business success, mixed with carefully curated philanthropy. Voltaire Industries had tentacles in everything from tech startups to real estate development. The man himself appeared in photos at charity galas and business conferences, always impeccably dressed, always alone. His eyes caught her attention in every image. Dark and intense, they seemed to look straight through the camera lens. Something about his expression made her stomach flutter with an emotion she couldn't name. The private jet exceeded every expectation Celestine had formed about wealth. Cream leather seats, a flight attendant who offered champagne she was too nervous to accept, and windows that revealed the country shrinking below. She pressed her nose to the glass like a child, watching Portland disappear into Oregon's green landscape. The flight attendant, a polished woman named Rebecca, made conversation during the 3-hour journey. First time flying private? First time flying anywhere, Celestine admitted. Mr. Voltaire treats his guests well. The estate is beautiful this time of year. Do you know him personally? Rebecca's smile became more guarded. I work for the company that manages his aircraft. He's particular about his privacy. Martha's Vineyard appeared below them as they descended, all rolling hills and pristine coastline. A black sedan waited on the private airstrip, its driver wearing the same expensive suit as the courier who delivered her invitation. The drive to the Voltaire estate took 20 minutes through landscapes that belonged in magazines. Manicured lawns gave way to wilder coastal terrain, and then massive iron gates appeared, flanked by stone pillars topped with bronze eagles. The mansion beyond the gates defied every assumption Celestine had made about wealth. It wasn't just large. It was imposing, built from gray stone that caught the late afternoon light. Towers and balconies created dramatic silhouettes against the sky, while formal gardens stretched toward cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. The sedan stopped at the main entrance, where stone steps led to doors that could have belonged to a cathedral. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a crisp navy uniform, descended to meet them. Miss Ashford? I'm Isadora, the estate manager. Mr. Voltaire is expecting you. Celestine followed Isadora through doors that opened into a foyer larger than her entire apartment. Marble floors reflected light from a chandelier that probably cost more than she'd earn in her lifetime. Oil paintings in gilt frames lined the walls, their subjects gazing down with expressions of aristocratic disdain. Mr. Voltaire will receive you in the library, Isadora said, leading her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The library doors were solid mahogany, carved with intricate patterns that drew the eye upward. Isadora knocked twice, waited for a response Celestine couldn't hear, then pushed the doors open. "Miss Celestine Ashford," she announced. The man standing behind the massive desk looked exactly like his photographs, yet somehow more substantial in person. Darius Voltaire was tall and lean, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a narrow waist. But it was his eyes that stopped her breathing. They were the color of storm clouds, intense and calculating as they studied her face with an expression she couldn't read. "Miss Ashford." His voice was deep, cultured, with just enough roughness to suggest he wasn't entirely civilized beneath the polish. "Welcome to my home." Celestine's fingers tightened around her purse strap as Darius moved from behind his desk. He was taller than she'd expected, and something in his controlled movements reminded her of a predator sizing up prey. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of waves against the cliffs below. "You're younger than I anticipated," he said, circling her slowly. His eyes catalogued every detail of her appearance with an intensity that made her skin prickle. 22. "Yes, sir." The formal address slipped out automatically, a remnant of her years in foster care where deference was survival. No need for formalities. "We're going to become very well acquainted." The way he said it sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Tell me about your qualifications." Celestine launched into the practice speech she'd rehearsed on the plane, detailing her library science degree and her work organizing historical documents at the Portland Library. But Darius wasn't listening to her words. His attention remained fixed on her face, as if searching for something specific. "Your mother," he interrupted. "What was her name?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. I was raised in foster care." Something flickered across his features, too quick to interpret. "No family records? Birth certificates?" The adoption agency said the files were sealed. "Why does it matter for a library position?" Darius turned away, moving to the window that offered a panoramic view of the ocean. "Background checks are standard for positions involving valuable collections. Some of these manuscripts are worth more than most people's houses." The explanation felt rehearsed, but Celestine needed this job too desperately to question his methods. "I understand completely. Do you?" He faced her again, and this time his expression was openly calculating. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, what would you do for $80,000? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Celestine felt heat rise in her cheeks as the implications became clear. "I'm here for legitimate employment, Mr. Voltaire." "Of course you are." His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. But desperation makes people flexible about definitions. "I may be desperate, but I'm not stupid." The words came out harder than she'd intended. Years of navigating the foster system had taught her to recognize predators, and every instinct screamed that she was facing one now. Darius laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Excellent. I despise simpering weakness." He moved to a cabinet built into the wall, retrieving a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid. "Drink." "I don't drink." How refreshingly pure. The mockery in his tone was unmistakable. "Tell me, what do you know about revenge?" Celestine's pulse quickened. This conversation had veered far from any job interview she'd ever imagined. "I'm sorry. Revenge," he repeated, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey. "The systematic destruction of someone who has wronged you. Do you believe in it?" "I believe in moving forward instead of looking backward." How wonderfully naive. He took a sip of his drink, never breaking eye contact. What if someone had destroyed your entire life? Taken everything you cared about and ground it into dust? Would you still advocate for moving forward? The intensity in his voice made her take a step backward. "What does this have to do with organizing your library?" "Everything." He set down his glass with deliberate precision. "You see, Miss Ashford, you're not here for your qualifications. You're here because of who you are." "I don't understand." "You will." He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later Isadora appeared in the doorway. "Please show Miss Ashford to the Rose Suite. She'll be staying for the weekend." "I never agreed to stay the weekend." Celestine's voice rose with panic. The invitation said this was an evening event. "Plans change." His dismissal was absolute. Dinner is at 8. Formal attire is expected. Isadora stepped forward with a gentle but firm touch on Celestine's elbow. This way, miss. Wait. Celestine pulled free of Isadora's grip. If this isn't about a job, what is it about? Darius's smile was the most frightening thing she'd ever seen. Consider it an education in the consequences of other people's choices. The Rose Suite was larger than any hotel room Celestine had ever seen, complete with a sitting area, a marble bathroom, and a 4-poster bed draped in silk. Someone had already unpacked her single overnight bag and laid out a dress she'd never seen before on the bed. The gown was midnight blue silk that would complement her pale complexion perfectly. A note in elegant handwriting lay beside it. For tonight's dinner. The original was clearly inadequate. Celestine crumpled the note, humiliation burning in her chest. Her graduation dress might have been simple, but it was hers. This felt like charity, or worse, like she was being dressed up for some purpose she didn't understand. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Isadora entered carrying a jewelry box. Mr. Voltaire thought you might need accessories. I don't want his gifts. Isadora's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. Miss, if I may offer some advice. Mr. Voltaire doesn't make requests. He gives orders. Fighting him will only make things more difficult. More difficult than what? I still don't understand what I'm doing here. The older woman hesitated, then moved closer and lowered her voice. Be very careful tonight. Mr. Voltaire has invited other guests, powerful people. They can be unkind to those they perceive as beneath them. What kind of people? The kind who treat others as entertainment. Isadora placed the jewelry box on the dresser. The kind who enjoy watching someone suffer. Fear crystallized in Celestine's stomach. I need to leave. The next ferry doesn't run until Monday morning. Even if it did, Mr. Voltaire's security would prevent you from reaching it. Isadora moved toward the door, then paused. Wear the dress, Miss Ashford. Play whatever game he's planning. And remember that sometimes survival means enduring what you cannot change. Alone again, Celestine stared at the silk gown and tried to understand how her life had taken such a dramatic turn in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been a struggling librarian facing eviction. Tonight, she was trapped in a mansion with a man who spoke of revenge and consequences, surrounded by people who treated cruelty as entertainment. She picked up the dress, feeling the expensive fabric slip through her fingers like water. Whatever game Darius Voltaire was playing, she was clearly a pawn rather than a player. But pawns, she reminded herself, sometimes survive by being underestimated. It was time to find out exactly what price she was expected to pay for her desperation. The dining room could have hosted a state dinner. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across a mahogany table that stretched nearly the length of the room, while oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilded frames. Celestine hesitated in the doorway, the silk dress clinging to her curves in ways that made her feel exposed despite the modest neckline. 5 guests had already assembled, their conversations dying as she entered. The women wore jewelry that could fund small countries, their surgically perfected faces arranged in expressions of cool assessment. The men radiated the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Darius stood at the head of the table, devastating in a black tuxedo that emphasized his lean build. His eyes found hers across the room, and she caught something that might have been approval before his expression returned to its usual inscrutability. Ladies and gentlemen, our final guest. His voice carried easily through the cavernous space. Miss Celestine Ashford, from Oregon. The way he said Oregon made it sound like a foreign country populated by savages. Several guests exchanged amused glances, and Celestine felt heat crawl up her neck. How charming, drawled a woman with platinum hair piled into an elaborate chignon. And what brings you to Martha's Vineyard, dear? Miss Ashford is considering a position with my foundation, Darius replied before Celestine could answer. She has a particular expertise in handling delicate materials. The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone at the table. A man with silver temples and predatory eyes leaned forward with interest. Really? What sort of materials? Celestine found her voice. Historical documents and rare manuscripts. How academic. The platinum woman's smile was razor-sharp. I'm Victoria Pemberton. My husband owns half the newspapers on the East Coast. The introductions continued around the table. Senator Bradley Hayes and his wife Constance, tech mogul Marcus Chun, real estate heiress Sophia Blackthorne, names that appeared regularly in financial publications and society pages. Celestine took her assigned seat between Marcus Chun and an empty chair, hyper-aware of how her simple dress and borrowed jewelry marked her as an outsider. The conversation flowed around subjects she couldn't contribute to: private island purchases, yacht club politics, the challenges of finding good help. "Tell us about yourself, Celestine," Victoria said during the soup course. "Where did you attend university?" "Portland State." "I'm not familiar with that institution." Victoria's tone suggested this was a personal failing on Portland State's part. "It's a public university," Celestine replied evenly. "How accessible." Senator Hayes set down his spoon with deliberate precision. "And your family background?" The question hung in the air like a trap. Celestine felt every eye at the table focus on her, waiting for her answer with the anticipation of spectators at a gladiatorial match. "I don't have a family background to speak of. I was raised in foster care." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's eyebrows rose in mock surprise, while Sophia Blackthorne actually laughed. "Foster care? How tragic." Victoria's voice dripped false sympathy. "No wonder you're so eager to improve your circumstances. What exactly are you implying?" Celestine's hand tightened around her wine glass. "Nothing at all, dear. Simply that we all understand desperation in our own ways." Marcus Chin leaned closer, his breath wine-scented against her ear. "Though some of us handle it more gracefully than others." Celestine started to push back from the table, but Darius's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough." The single word carried such authority that every conversation stopped. Darius's eyes swept the table, settling briefly on each guest with an expression that promised consequences for anyone who continued the attack. "Miss Ashford is my guest," he said quietly. "I expect her to be treated with appropriate respect." Victoria's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Of course, Darius. We're simply getting acquainted." "Then perhaps you should share some of your own background, Victoria. I'm sure Miss Ashford would find your rise from cocktail waitress to society matron fascinating." Victoria's face went white beneath her expertly applied makeup. The insult landed with surgical precision, and Celestine realized she was witnessing a masterclass in social warfare. "That was a long time ago," Victoria said through gritted teeth. "Indeed, people can transcend their origins with the right opportunities." Darius's gaze shifted to Celestine, and she caught something unexpected in his expression. Protection, perhaps, or possession. The remainder of dinner passed in stilted conversation, the earlier predatory atmosphere replaced by wary tension. Celestine said little, content to observe the complex dynamics between these people who wielded money and influence like weapons. As the evening wound down and guests began making their farewells, Senator Hayes approached her with a business card. "If you ever find yourself in Washington, I'd be happy to discuss opportunities in my office." The card fell from Celestine's fingers before she could take it. Marcus Chin laughed as he retrieved it from the floor. "Careful, Bradley. I don't think our librarian appreciates your particular brand of opportunity." "That's enough." Darius appeared at Celestine's shoulder, his presence immediately shifting the balance of power. "Good evening, gentlemen." The dismissal was absolute. Within minutes, the dining room emptied except for Celestine and Darius. She stood frozen beside her chair, overwhelmed by the evening's psychological assault. "You defended me," she said finally. "I protect what belongs to me." The possessive statement should have angered her, but instead it sent an unwelcome thrill through her system. "I don't belong to anyone. Don't you?" He moved closer, near enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "You're here because I wanted you here. You're wearing the dress I chose, the jewelry I provided. You ate at my table and slept under my roof. That doesn't make me your property, doesn't it?" His hand rose to trace the line of her jaw, the touch gentle despite the steel in his voice. "Tell me, Celestine, when was the last time someone fought for you?" The question hit like a physical blow. Never, she realized. In 22 years, no one had ever stood up for her the way he had tonight. "You didn't fight for me," she whispered. "You were protecting your investment." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she felt her breath catch. "Was I?" The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility and danger. Then Darius stepped back, the spell broken. Sweet dreams, Miss Ashford. Tomorrow will be far more interesting. He left her alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of crystal and china, wondering how a man could make her feel both cherished and terrified with equal intensity. Sleep eluded Celestine despite the Egyptian cotton sheets and down pillows that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Darius's face during dinner, the way his expression had shifted from cold calculation to something almost protective when his guests turned vicious. At 2 a.m., she gave up and wrapped herself in the silk robe hanging in the marble bathroom. The French doors leading to her private balcony beckoned, promising fresh air and space to think. The night was clear and surprisingly warm for late October. Moonlight painted the formal gardens in silver, creating shadows that danced with the ocean breeze. She gripped the wrought iron railing and tried to make sense of her situation. Couldn't sleep either? Celestine spun toward the voice, her heart hammering against her ribs. Darius emerged from the shadows of an adjacent balcony, having apparently crossed over via a connecting walkway she hadn't noticed. He'd changed from his tuxedo into dark jeans and a cable-knit sweater that made him look younger, less intimidating. "You startled me. My apologies." He leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his body. "The ocean view is one of the few things about this place that brings me peace. It's beautiful." She gestured toward the moonlit water stretching to the horizon. "I've never seen anything like it. No ocean views from Portland?" The closest I got to luxury was the public library's reading room. The admission slipped out before she could stop it, another reminder of the vast gulf between their worlds. "Tell me about your life there." The request surprised her. "Why?" "Curiosity." His voice was softer in the darkness, lacking the edge it had carried all evening. What did a typical day look like for Miss Celestine Ashford? Boring, probably. I'd wake up in my studio apartment, make coffee with a machine I bought at a thrift store, and take the bus to work. 8 hours of cataloging returns and helping people find books they could easily locate themselves. Then home to a dinner of whatever was on sale at the grocery store. Friends? Relationships? Not really. Foster care doesn't teach you how to trust people. She glanced at him sideways. "What about you? What's a typical day like when you're not terrifying dinner guests?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Meetings with people who want my money, phone calls with people who owe me money, and strategic planning sessions where we discuss acquiring more money." "Sounds lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "Wealth insulates you from genuine human connection. Everyone wants something. What do you want from me?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Darius turned to face her fully, his storm gray eyes searching her features in the moonlight. "That's complicated. Try me." He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture unexpectedly tender. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed in goodness despite evidence to the contrary. What happened to her?" "Life happened. Betrayal. The real world." His hand lingered against her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. She learned that idealism is a luxury most people can't afford. Maybe she just needed someone to believe in her idealism. Maybe. His voice was barely above a whisper. Or maybe some people are too damaged to deserve that kind of faith. "I don't believe that." "You should." Despite his words, he moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "I'm not a good man, Celestine. Everything about this situation should terrify you. Then why don't I feel terrified right now?" The question seemed to shatter whatever control he'd been maintaining. His free hand found her waist, pulling her against him as his mouth descended to capture hers. The kiss was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd experienced in her limited romantic history. Darius kissed like a man claiming territory, his lips moving against hers with a hunger that set her entire body aflame. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his sweater as he backed her against the stone wall of the balcony. "This is insane," he murmured against her throat, his breath hot against her skin. "Then stop." Instead, he lifted her onto the wide stone railing, stepping between her legs and deepening the kiss until she felt dizzy with want. Her silk robe had somehow come untied, and his hands found bare skin beneath, fingers tracing patterns that made her arch against him. "You're supposed to hate me," he said, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "Why?" "Because of who you are. Because of what this is." "What is this?" He stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring across his features. Then he stepped back abruptly, leaving her feeling cold and exposed. A mistake. The words hit like a slap. Celestine slid down from the railing, pulling her robe closed with shaking hands. If I'm such a mistake, why did you bring me here? You wouldn't understand. Try me. I'm smarter than you think. It's not about intelligence. He ran both hands through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. It's about justice. About making sure the sins of one generation don't go unpunished. What sins? What are you talking about? Ask me tomorrow. He was already moving toward the connecting walkway. After you've learned the truth about why you're really here. Darius, wait. But he was gone, leaving her alone on the balcony with more questions than answers and the lingering taste of him on her lips. Whatever game he was playing, she was beginning to suspect that she wasn't the only one at risk of losing. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and secrets, and Celestine wrapped her arms around herself as she stared out at the dark water. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything between them. She could feel it in the charged air, in the way he'd looked at her like she was both salvation and damnation. But tonight, for just a few stolen moments, she'd felt something she'd never experienced before. She'd felt wanted, protected, desired by a man who could have anyone, but had chosen to kiss her with desperate intensity under the Martha's Vineyard stars. Whatever truth waited in the morning, she would face it. But she would never forget the way he'd made her feel in the darkness, when his walls had cracked just enough to let her glimpse the broken man beneath the polished exterior. Celestine woke to someone knocking insistently on her door. Sunlight streamed through the French doors, indicating she'd finally fallen asleep near dawn. The silk robe lay crumpled on the floor where she'd dropped it, and memories of Darius's kiss sent heat coursing through her system. Miss Ashford. Isadora's voice carried urgency. There's someone here to see you. Celestine pulled on jeans and a sweater, running fingers through her tangled hair before opening the door. Isadora looked pale, her usual composure cracked around the edges. Who is it? Mr. Thaddeus Grimwood. He says it's urgent. The name meant nothing to Celestine, but Isadora's obvious distress suggested it should. Where's Darius? Mr. Voltaire left early this morning for Boston. Business meetings. Isadora's eyes darted nervously down the hallway. Mr. Grimwood is waiting in the morning room. The morning room was smaller than the dining room, but no less intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A man in his 50s stood with his back to the door, studying a painting of a woman in Victorian dress. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit expensive but understated. Miss Ashford. He turned as she entered, revealing sharp features and calculating blue eyes. I'm Thaddeus Grimwood, Darius's former business partner. Please sit. I'd rather stand. What do you want? Direct. I appreciate that quality. He moved to a sideboard and poured coffee from a silver service, the gesture somehow making him appear at home in Darius's space. I'm here because I believe you deserve to know the truth about why you're here. Which is, you're not Darius's first choice for a librarian position. Thaddeus handed her a cup, his smile lacking any warmth. You're here because of your mother. Celestine's hand trembled slightly as she accepted the coffee. I told you yesterday, I don't know who my mother was. But Darius does. Thaddeus returned to the painting, gesturing toward the woman in the gilded frame. Meet Madeline Ashford, your mother, Darius's former fiancée. The cup slipped from Celestine's fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Coffee spread in a dark stain across the white stone, but she couldn't look away from the painting. The woman had her eyes. The same green color, the same shape, the same delicate bone structure that Celestine saw in her mirror every morning. That's impossible. DNA doesn't lie, my dear. Thaddeus produced a manila folder from his briefcase. Darius hired private investigators the moment he learned of your existence. Birth records, hospital files, adoption paperwork. It's all here. Celestine's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. The documents Thaddeus spread across the coffee table painted a picture that shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. Birth certificate listing Madeline Ashford as mother, father unknown. Hospital records from a private clinic in Newport. Adoption papers signed when Celestine was 3 days old. She was 19 when she had you. Thaddeus continued conversationally. Just a year older than when she became engaged to Darius. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what kind of man you're dealing with. Thaddeus sat across from her, leaning forward with mock concern. Darius didn't bring you here for your library skills, Celestine. He brought you here for revenge. The word hit like a physical blow. Revenge for what? Your mother destroyed him. Thaddeus's voice carried satisfaction, as if he enjoyed delivering pain. 3 weeks before their wedding, she disappeared with his best friend and half his inheritance. Left him standing at the altar in front of 300 guests. Celestine stared at the documents, trying to process information that felt surreal. Even if that's true, what does it have to do with me? Everything. Thaddeus gathered the papers into a neat stack. Your mother took something precious from Darius. Now he's planning to take something precious from her. She's dead. The adoption agency told me she died in a car accident when I was 5. Another lie, I'm afraid. Madeline is very much alive, living in Switzerland with her husband. They have 2 children together, a nice suburban life built on Darius's stolen money. The room spun around Celestine as the implications sank in. Every moment of the past 2 days took on sinister meaning. Darius's intense scrutiny, his questions about her background, the way he defended her at dinner. He's been planning this for years, Thaddeus continued, waiting for the right moment to strike back at Madeline through the daughter she abandoned. What kind of revenge? Think about it, my dear. You're young, innocent, desperate. Perfect prey for a man with Darius's appetites. Thaddeus's smile was genuinely cruel now. He'll seduce you, use you, break you in every way possible. Then he'll send the pieces back to your mother with his compliments. Celestine shot to her feet, pacing to the window as nausea rolled through her stomach. The kiss on the balcony, the protective way he defended her at dinner, the vulnerability in his voice when he'd called himself damaged. All of it calculated manipulation. You're lying. Am I? Then why did he leave so suddenly this morning? Why didn't he tell you about your mother himself? Thaddeus stood as well, moving to stand beside her at the window. He's in Boston right now, probably calling Madeline to let her know he has her daughter. Stop. Face reality, Celestine. You mean nothing to him except as a weapon against a woman who wronged him 20 years ago. The words cut deep because they aligned with every fear she'd carried since childhood. Every family that had returned her to the system. Every person who had looked through her as if she didn't exist. She was disposable, forgettable, useful only as long as she served someone else's purpose. What do you want from me? Leave. Thaddeus's voice softened with false sympathy. Pack your things and go back to Portland. I'll arrange transportation, give you enough money to start over somewhere else. Disappear before Darius returns, and this gets uglier. Why would you help me? Because I'm not the monster here, despite what Darius might have told you about me. Thaddeus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I knew your mother, Celestine. She was kind, innocent, much like you. What happened between her and Darius was complicated, but she didn't deserve to lose her daughter twice. Celestine stared out at the gardens where she'd walked with Darius just hours earlier, remembering the way he'd looked at her in the moonlight. Had it all been performance? The careful way he'd touched her face, the conflict in his voice when he'd called himself damaged? I need time to think. Of course. Thaddeus moved toward the door. But don't take too long. Darius will be back tonight, and once he begins the final phase of his plan, there won't be any going back. Alone in the morning room, Celestine sank back into the chair and stared at the painting of her mother. Madeline Ashford looked young and hopeful, wearing a diamond necklace that caught the light like captured stars. The same necklace Isadora had brought to her room the night before, now sitting in its velvet box on her dresser upstairs. Celestine spent the afternoon in her room, staring at the diamond necklace and replaying every interaction with Darius through the lens of Thaddeus's revelation. The protective way he defended her at dinner now seemed like an owner guarding his property. The kiss on the balcony felt calculated, designed to make her trust him before he destroyed her. By 5 p.m., she'd made her decision. The small overnight bag barely held her few belongings, and she left the silk dress hanging in the closet like a discarded costume. Whatever game Darius was playing, she refused to be a willing participant. The hallways seemed endless as she made her way toward the main entrance, each step echoing in the cavernous space. Portraits of Darius's ancestors watched her progress with painted eyes that seemed to judge her cowardice. Leaving so soon, Celestine spun toward the voice, her heart hammering against her ribs. Darius stood in the doorway of his study, still wearing the business suit he'd traveled in. His storm gray eyes took in her packed bag and casual clothes with an expression she couldn't read. I have to get back to Portland. My job. Your job terminated your employment yesterday for excessive absences. He stepped into the hallway, moving with the predatory grace that had attracted and terrified her from the beginning. Did you think I wouldn't verify your circumstances before bringing you here? The casual revelation of his manipulation hit like a slap. You cost me my job. I solved a problem. You were miserable there, underpaid and undervalued. He gestured toward the bag in her hands. Running away seems to be a family trait. The reference to her mother made Celestine's temper flare. At least she was smart enough to escape whatever you had planned for her. Darius went very still, the temperature in the hallway seeming to drop several degrees. What did you say? I know who I am. I know why you brought me here. She lifted her chin defiantly, drawing strength from her anger. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? Thaddeus. The name came out like a curse. What exactly did he tell you? The truth. That you're using me to get revenge on my mother for leaving you at the altar 20 years ago. Darius laughed, but the sound held no humor. And you believed him? Why shouldn't I? It explains everything. The mysterious job offer, the way you've been studying me like a specimen under a microscope. Her voice rose with each word. I'm not stupid, Darius. I know when I'm being used. Do you? He moved closer, backing her against the wall with the same controlled intensity he'd shown on the balcony. Then tell me, what was the kiss last night? Part of my master plan to seduce and destroy you? Yes. The word came out as a whisper, lacking conviction. What about this? His hand rose to cup her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Is this calculated manipulation? Stop. But she didn't pull away, caught between desire and self-preservation. The way you respond to my touch, the way your breath catches when I'm close. Is that part of your mother's legacy too? Don't. Her hands pressed against his chest, but she could feel his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. Thaddeus told you I brought you here for revenge, and you believed him because it fits your worldview. Poor little orphan girl, unwanted and discarded. His voice was soft, ruthless. But what if you're wrong? Then tell me the truth. Darius stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring across his features. Then he stepped back, the spell broken. The truth is complicated. Everything with you is complicated. Yes, I knew who you were before I brought you here. The admission came out flat, matter of fact. Yes, I hired investigators to find Madeline's daughter. And yes, part of me wanted to use you to hurt her. Each word hit like a physical blow, confirming Thaddeus's story. Celestine closed her eyes, trying to block out the pain. But that changed the moment I saw you. Darius's voice softened with something that sounded genuine. You're nothing like her, Celestine. Where she was calculating, you're honest. Where she was selfish, you're generous. Where she was cold, you're... What? Everything I didn't know I was looking for. The words hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Celestine wanted desperately to believe him, but Thaddeus's warnings echoed in her mind. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. Darius moved to the window, staring out at the gathering dusk. Trust isn't something either of us does well. Then why should I stay? Because leaving won't change what's already happened between us. He turned back to face her, his expression raw with an emotion she'd never seen before. Because somewhere in this mess of revenge and manipulation, something real began. What if you're wrong? What if this is just another game? Then we'll both pay the price. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. But I'd rather risk everything than watch you walk away believing the worst of me. Celestine stared at his outstretched hand, torn between logic and longing. Every rational thought told her to run, to get as far from Darius Voltaire as possible before his dark world consumed her completely. But her heart whispered different counsel. She thought of the vulnerability in his voice when he'd called himself damaged, the way he defended her against his cruel guests, the desperate hunger in his kiss. If I stay, I need honesty. No more games, no more manipulation. Agreed. And I want to know everything about my mother. Not Thaddeus's version or your version. The truth. That's more complicated than you realize. Why? Darius moved to his study door, gesturing for her to follow. Because Thaddeus Grimwood has been playing his own game for 20 years. And I'm not the only one who wants revenge. The study was exactly as she remembered from that first day, dominated by the massive desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But now Darius moved to a wall safe hidden behind a portrait, his fingers working the combination with practiced ease. Inside were documents, photographs, and a thick folder marked with her mother's name. He spread them across his desk with the careful precision of someone building a case. "Your mother didn't leave me for another man," he said quietly. "She left because Thaddeus convinced her I was having an affair with his wife." "Was you?" "No. But the evidence he manufactured was compelling enough to destroy her faith in me." Celestine moved closer to examine the documents. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, hotel receipts, even photographs that appeared to show Darius with a woman who wasn't Madeline. "He wanted your inheritance. He wanted everything I had. The business, the money, the woman I loved." Darius's voice carried 20 years of accumulated rage. When Madeline disappeared, she took nothing with her except the clothes on her back. Thaddeus spread rumors about theft to cover his own embezzlement. Then why does he want me to leave? Darius looked up from the documents, his expression grim. "Because he's not finished destroying my life. And having you here threatens whatever he's planning next." Celestine woke to the sound of shattering glass. Moonlight streamed through her bedroom windows, and the clock on her nightstand read 3 a.m. She'd fallen asleep in Darius's study after hours of poring over documents that painted Thaddeus as a master manipulator who'd spent decades orchestrating the destruction of everyone around him. Another crash echoed from somewhere below, followed by voices. Male voices, angry and urgent. She pulled on her robe and crept to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Footsteps thundered through the hallways, accompanied by Isadora's frightened protests. "Where is she?" The voice was Thaddeus, but stripped of its earlier polished veneer. "I know she's here somewhere. Mr. Grimwood, please, you're frightening the staff." Isadora's voice carried genuine fear. "I don't care about your staff. I want the girl." Celestine's blood turned to ice. Something had changed, some urgency that drove Thaddeus to abandon subtlety for direct action. She reached for her phone to call Darius, but the screen showed no signal. The door handle turned before she could lock it. Thaddeus entered with 2 men in expensive suits who looked more like enforcers than business associates. His silver hair was disheveled, his calculating composure replaced by barely controlled rage. "There you are." His smile was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. "We need to have a conversation. Get out of my room." "Your room?" Thaddeus laughed. "Nothing in this house belongs to you, my dear. You're a temporary inconvenience that's about to be resolved." The 2 men moved to flank her, cutting off any escape route. Celestine backed toward the balcony doors, her mind racing through options that all seemed to end badly. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. To finish what I started 20 years ago." Thaddeus straightened his tie with deliberate precision. "Darius has become inconveniently attached to you, which threatens my timeline." "Timeline for what?" "The complete destruction of everything he holds dear." Thaddeus moved to her dresser, picking up the diamond necklace with casual familiarity, starting with the woman who reminds him so painfully of his lost love. "You're insane." "I'm thorough. 20 years ago, I took his fiancée and his fortune. Tonight, I take his life." The casual mention of murder sent adrenaline flooding through Celestine's system. "He'll fight you." "Not if he thinks you're in danger." Thaddeus pocketed the necklace and nodded to his associates. "Mr. Voltaire has a weakness for playing hero. It's going to get him killed." The men grabbed her arms before she could resist, their grip professional and unbreakable. They hauled her from the room despite her struggles, Thaddeus following with the satisfied air of a man whose plans were finally falling into place. The journey through the mansion's corridors passed in a blur of panicked protests and futile resistance. They bypassed the main entrance, heading instead toward the service areas that led to the estate's private dock. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere Darius will find you. Eventually." Thaddeus checked his watch with theatrical precision, assuming he survives the next hour. The dock stretched into Martha's Vineyard Sound, waves lapping against the wooden pilings with deceptive gentleness. A sleek speedboat waited at the far end, its engine already running. "The beauty of islands," Thaddeus said conversationally, "is their isolation. No witnesses, no interruptions, no inconvenient authorities arriving at the wrong moment." They forced her onto the boat, zip-tying her hands behind her back with efficient brutality. One of Thaddeus's men remained on the dock while the other took the helm, steering them away from shore with practiced ease. "This won't work," Celestine said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Darius isn't stupid enough to walk into your trap, isn't he?" Thaddeus produced a phone and typed rapidly. "Let's find out." The message was simple. "I have something that belongs to you. Pier 7 at Vineyard Haven. Come alone, or she dies." 15 minutes later, the boat pulled alongside a smaller commercial dock in the island's main harbor. The area was deserted at this hour, streetlights casting eerie shadows across empty parking lots and shuttered shops. They hauled her onto the pier, Thaddeus's associate positioning himself behind a piling with clear sight lines to the approaching road. The setup was professional, designed to give them maximum advantage when Darius arrived. "He won't come," Celestine insisted, though her heart hammered with the knowledge that he would. "Of course he will. That's his fatal flaw." Thaddeus checked his weapon, a pistol that gleamed dully in the moonlight. Darius always thinks he can save everyone. It's what makes him predictable. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the pier as a black sedan pulled into the parking area. Darius emerged alone, moving with careful deliberation toward the dock. Even from a distance, Celestine could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled fury in his stride. "Let her go, Thaddeus." His voice carried clearly across the water. "This is between us." "How noble." Thaddeus pressed the gun against Celestine's temple, the metal cold against her skin. "Walk out onto the pier." Slowly, Darius complied, his hands visible and empty as he approached. In the harsh dock lighting, his face looked carved from stone, but his eyes never left Celestine's. 20 years, Thaddeus said when Darius reached the halfway point. 20 years I've waited for this moment. Why? Darius stopped walking, his attention focused entirely on the man holding the gun. "You got everything you wanted. The money, the business, the satisfaction of destroying my engagement. But not your life. That oversight kept me awake at night." Thaddeus's voice carried genuine hatred. "You had everything handed to you while the rest of us fought for scraps. It wasn't enough to take your fortune. I needed to take your future." Madeline was innocent in this. Madeline was weak. She believed my lies because she wanted to believe them. Thaddeus's grip tightened on the weapon. But her daughter could have been different. If you hadn't corrupted her with your obsession. "I love her." The simple statement cut through the night air like a blade. Celestine's breath caught. In all their conversations, through all the manipulation and revelation, he'd never used that word. Now he spoke it like a confession, raw and unguarded. "Love." Thaddeus laughed. "The same word you used for her mother before you betrayed her." "I never betrayed Madeline." "That was your lie." "Prove it." The challenge hung in the air between them. Darius reached slowly into his jacket, producing a thick manila envelope that he tossed onto the pier. "Bank records showing your embezzlement. Hotel receipts with forged signatures. Testimony from the woman you paid to pose in those photographs." His voice was steady, matter of fact. 20 years of evidence that you've been stealing from everyone who trusted you." Thaddeus's face went white in the moonlight. "You can't prove any of that." "I already have. The FBI received copies an hour ago, along with documentation of your current activities." Darius took another step forward. "It's over, Thaddeus. Let her go, and maybe they'll consider your cooperation when they calculate your sentence." "No." The word came out as a snarl. "I won't let you win again." Time slowed as Thaddeus swung the gun away from Celestine toward Darius. She threw herself sideways, breaking his grip and sending them both tumbling toward the edge of the pier. The gunshot echoed across the harbor as they hit the water together, the shock of cold salt spray stealing her breath. Celestine surfaced gasping, her hands still zip-tied behind her back, making it impossible to swim effectively. Darius was already in the water beside her, blood spreading from a graze along his shoulder. His arms circled her waist, keeping her afloat as sirens wailed in the distance. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough with concern and adrenaline. "No. You. I'll live." He pulled her toward the dock ladder, his movements awkward but determined. "FBI should be here any minute." Thaddeus floated face down 10 feet away, his expensive suit dark with water and defeat. The gun had sunk into the harbor's depths, taking his final gambit with it. As federal agents swarmed the pier and paramedics tended to Darius's wound, Celestine sat wrapped in a blanket and tried to process what had happened. The man who'd manipulated her entire existence was gone, but the revelation of Darius's feelings still echoed in her mind. "Did you mean it?" she asked when they finally had a moment alone. "Which part?" "When you said you loved me." Darius looked at her for a long moment, his storm gray eyes soft with an emotion she'd never seen before. "Every word." The simple answer shattered the last of her defenses, and Celestine finally understood the difference between manipulation and truth. Love wasn't about control or revenge or careful calculation. It was about choosing someone despite the risk, about standing between them and harm even when it might cost everything. "I love you too," she whispered. His kiss tasted of salt water and second chances, of futures that neither of them had dared to imagine. In the distance, dawn painted the horizon with shades of hope, and for the first time in her life, Celestine knew exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Celestine stood on the deck of a sailboat anchored in Nantucket Sound, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of coral and gold. The simple white dress she wore moved with the ocean breeze, and the diamond necklace that had once belonged to her mother caught the fading light like captured stars. Second thoughts. Darius appeared behind her, magnificent in a navy suit that emphasized his lean build. The scar on his shoulder from Thaddeus's bullet was barely visible now, just a thin line that reminded them both how close they'd come to losing everything. "About marrying you?" "Never." She turned in his arms, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "About whether we're completely insane for having a wedding on a boat?" "Possibly. We could still move it to the estate and deal with 300 guests asking invasive questions about our whirlwind romance." "I'll take the boat." The guest list was deliberately small. Isadora, who'd become the closest thing to family either of them had. A few business associates who'd proven their loyalty during the FBI investigation into Thaddeus's crimes. The judge who would perform the ceremony, a woman Darius had known since college. "Mrs. Patterson sends her regrets," Celestine said, referring to her former landlord in Portland. Apparently, she's still recovering from the shock of discovering her problem tenant was dating a billionaire. "Former problem tenant," Darius corrected. "Current foundation director, future wife, and the woman who saved my life in more ways than one." The Ashford Foundation had been Celestine's idea, funded with a portion of the Voltaire fortune and dedicated to supporting aged-out foster children. The work gave her purpose beyond their relationship, a way to transform her painful past into something meaningful. "Any word from Switzerland?" Darius's expression grew thoughtful. "Madeline wants to meet you. When you're ready." The revelation that her mother was alive had been almost as shocking as everything else. Phone calls bridged the 22-year gap slowly, carefully, with both women tiptoeing around wounds that might never fully heal. "I think I'd like that. After the honeymoon. Speaking of which, are you going to tell me where we're going? Or is this another one of your mysterious surprises?" "Scotland. There's a castle in the Highlands that's been converted to a luxury hotel. Privacy, no paparazzi, and enough history to satisfy your academic tendencies." "You bought a castle?" "I rented a castle. There's a difference." The ceremony itself was perfect in its simplicity. Judge Harrison spoke about love conquering adversity while waves lapped against the boat's hull and seabirds wheeled overhead. Darius's vows were quietly intense, promising to spend his life proving himself worthy of her trust. Celestine's response was more emotional, acknowledging the miracle of finding home in a person rather than a place. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small group of witnesses erupted in applause that echoed across the water. But for Celestine, the world had narrowed to the man holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his universe. The reception was held on the boat's main deck, with catering from Martha's Vineyard's finest restaurant and champagne that probably cost more than her former annual salary. But the real luxury was the absence of performance, the knowledge that everyone present genuinely cared about their happiness. "I have something for you," Darius said during a quiet moment as their guests mingled on the forward deck. "More jewelry?" The necklace was enough. "Something different." He produced a leather-bound document from his jacket. The deed to a house in Portland, near the university, with enough space for a proper library. Celestine opened the folder, studying architectural plans for a renovated Victorian mansion. "Darius, this is too much. It's not a gift. It's an investment in our future." He pointed to specific rooms on the blueprint. Home office for foundation work, guest rooms for when we have visitors, and a library that can house my rare book collection. You want to live in Portland? I want to live wherever you're happiest. The estate will always be there for weekends and summers, but I know you need something that feels like home. The gesture overwhelmed her with its thoughtfulness. For someone who'd grown up in temporary placements, the idea of a permanent home designed specifically for their life together was almost too wonderful to believe. There's one more thing. Darius's voice carried a note of uncertainty that was rare for him. I know we haven't discussed children yet, but the house has excellent schools nearby. Children. The word came out as a whisper. Only if you want them. I know your childhood was difficult, and if you prefer to focus on the foundation work. She silenced him with a kiss that tasted of champagne and possibility. I want everything with you. Children, chaos, messy family dinners where we argue about homework and curfews. Even if they inherit my stubborn streak. Especially then, someone needs to keep you humble. As the sun set completely and stars appeared overhead, their guests began departing via water taxi to Martha's Vineyard. Soon only Isadora remained, supervising the crew as they prepared the boat for its overnight journey to Boston. Thank you, Celestine said, embracing the woman who'd protected her during those first dangerous days at the estate. For what, dear? For believing I was worth saving before I believed it myself. Isadora's eyes misted with tears. You saved him just as much. I haven't seen Mr. Voltaire truly smile in 20 years. Later, alone in the boat's luxurious master cabin, Celestine and Darius finally had their wedding night. But first, they sat on the small private deck and talked about the future they were building together. Do you ever regret how we met? Celestine asked, nestled against his chest as the boat rocked gently at anchor. Never. Even the ugly parts led us here. Thaddeus was right about one thing. You do have a hero complex. Only when it comes to you. His arms tightened around her. I spent 20 years believing I was too damaged for real love. You proved me wrong. We proved each other wrong. They made love with the kind of passionate intensity that comes from nearly losing everything, but also with the tender care of two people who knew they had forever to explore each other. When Celestine finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she dreamed of the Portland house and the children who might someday fill its rooms with laughter. The next morning brought news that Thaddeus's financial empire had completely collapsed, with authorities recovering millions in stolen assets. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the shadow that had haunted both their lives was finally gone. As their boat sailed toward Boston Harbor and the beginning of their married life, Celestine stood at the bow and watched the horizon. Behind them lay Martha's Vineyard, where a desperate librarian had answered a mysterious invitation and found her destiny. Ahead lay endless possibilities, anchored by the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. Ready for the adventure, Mrs. Voltaire? Darius appeared beside her, his storm-gray eyes bright with love and mischief. Ready for everything, she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, promising storms and calm seas, challenges and triumphs, but always together. For two people who had started as strangers bound by manipulation and revenge, they had discovered something infinitely more powerful, a love strong enough to weather any storm and deep enough to last a lifetime. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the Portland Victorian as Celestine chased 3-year-old James through the hallway, his dark hair and storm-gray eyes marking him unmistakably as his father's son. Baby Emma gurgled happily from her bouncer in the library, surrounded by the rare manuscripts that had become Darius's passion project since semi-retiring from active business management. Daddy's home. James shrieked with delight as the front door opened, abandoning his game of hide and seek to launch himself at Darius with the fearless enthusiasm of a child who had never doubted his place in the world. How did the board meeting go? Celestine asked, accepting her husband's kiss while balancing Emma on her hip. Even after 5 years of marriage, the simple domestic scene still felt miraculous to both of them. The foundation secured funding for 3 new transition houses, Darius reported, loosening his tie as James climbed onto his shoulders. Your proposal for the mentorship program was unanimously approved. The Ashford Foundation had grown beyond either of their wildest expectations, now operating in 12 states, and helping thousands of aged-out foster children build independent lives. Celestine's personal experience gave her unique insight into the challenges these young adults faced, while Darius's business acumen ensured the organization remained financially sustainable. Madeline called, Celestine said, following him into the kitchen where evidence of their chaotic but happy life covered every surface. She and the kids want to visit for Christmas this year. The relationship with her mother had evolved slowly but genuinely. Madeline's guilt over abandoning her daughter was balanced by Celestine's understanding of how young and frightened she'd been. Her half-siblings, 16-year-old twins who spoke 3 languages and played competitive tennis, had embraced their American sister with typical teenage enthusiasm. The house can handle it, Darius said, though his expression suggested he was already calculating sleeping arrangements and meal logistics. Your mother still thinks I'm a corrupting influence. You are a corrupting influence. Yesterday you taught James how to pick locks. That's a valuable life skill. He's 3 years old. Their playful argument was interrupted by the doorbell. Isadora entered without waiting for an answer, carrying grocery bags and wearing the comfortable clothes she favored since officially retiring to a cottage on the Martha's Vineyard estate. I brought dinner, she announced, kissing both children and shooing the adults out of her kitchen. Go spend time together while I spoil these babies properly. The evening ritual had developed organically after Isadora moved to Portland to help with the children. She claimed the city kept her young, but Celestine suspected she simply couldn't bear to be separated from the family she'd helped create. Later, after the children were bathed and tucked into beds covered with books and stuffed animals, Celestine and Darius sat on their back porch swing and watched stars appear over the city skyline. The diamond necklace caught moonlight as she leaned against his shoulder, both of them content with the comfortable silence of a couple who no longer needed words to communicate. Do you miss it? She asked eventually. Miss what? The excitement, the danger, corporate intrigue, and mysterious dinner parties. Darius considered the question seriously, as he did all her inquiries into his emotional state. I miss the adrenaline sometimes, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. Even when James colored in your first edition Dickens? Even then. His arm tightened around her. Do you regret giving up your PhD program? Celestine had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program in library science, but chose instead to focus on the foundation and their growing family. I'm getting a better education running a national nonprofit than any classroom could provide. You could still go back. The university would hold your place. Maybe someday, when the kids are older and the foundation is more established. She tilted her head to look at him. We have time for everything. Time had become their greatest luxury. After the compressed intensity of their early relationship, the ability to plan years in advance felt almost decadent. They discussed everything from Emma's college fund to where they might retire, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges arose, they would face them together. I saw Victoria Pemberton at the charity auction last week, Darius mentioned casually. How is the former cocktail waitress? Divorced again. She asked about you. Fondly, I'm sure. She wanted to know if we were hiring domestic staff. Apparently, her current financial situation is somewhat reduced. Celestine laughed at the irony. And you told her? That we already have the best help money can buy. He nodded toward the kitchen window, where Isadora could be seen preparing their breakfast for the next morning with characteristic efficiency. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. James's upcoming enrollment in preschool, Emma's attempts to crawl, plans for their summer vacation to Scotland. Normal concerns of normal people living a normal life, which felt extraordinary to two individuals who had started their relationship in anything but normal circumstances. I love you, Celestine said suddenly, the words still carrying the wonder of discovery even after years of marriage. I love you too, even when you leave coffee cups in the library, even when you rearrange my filing system because your way is more efficient, even when you cry at animated movies, even when you pretend you don't cry at them too. Their gentle teasing was interrupted by Emma's fussy cry from the nursery monitor. Darius rose to handle the middle-of-the-night feeding, a task he'd claimed from the beginning despite Celestine's protests about his business schedule. Watching him disappear into the house, Celestine marveled at how completely their lives had intertwined. The man who had once seemed so dangerous, so damaged by his past, now sang lullabies to their daughter and patiently taught their son to tie his shoes. She thought occasionally about the alternate timeline where she'd accepted Thaddeus's offer and fled Martha's Vineyard that first weekend. In that version of events, she would have returned to Portland alone, probably found another low-paying library job, lived a quiet life of careful respectability. Safe, perhaps, but empty of the passion and purpose that now filled every day. When Darius returned 20 minutes later, Emma settled and sleeping peacefully, he found Celestine still on the porch swing with a photo album in her lap. "What are you looking at?" "Our wedding pictures." She showed him a candid shot of them laughing together during the reception, both looking young and impossibly happy. "Do you think we'll still be this ridiculous when we're 80? "I'm counting on it." He settled beside her again, and they flipped through images that documented their journey from that first tentative kiss on a Martha's Vineyard balcony to this moment of complete contentment. Wedding photos gave way to baby pictures, family vacations, foundation events where they worked side by side to change lives. "No regrets?" Darius asked, echoing her earlier question. "Only one." Celestine closed the album and looked at him seriously. "I wish I could go back and tell that scared girl in the Portland studio apartment that everything was going to be okay. That love wasn't something that happened to other people. She figured it out eventually. We both did." As they prepared for bed, moving through the comfortable choreography of a long-married couple, Celestine caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the desperate librarian who had answered a mysterious invitation 5 years earlier. This woman had purpose, confidence, a family who adored her, and work that mattered. But most importantly, she had learned to trust in love's power to transform even the most damaged hearts into something beautiful. In the master bedroom they designed together, surrounded by photographs of their children and mementos from their travels, Celestine and Darius fell asleep as they did every night, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Outside their window, Portland slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, while somewhere in the distance, the ocean whispered promises of endless possibilities to two souls who had found their way home to each other against all odds.